Welcome back to Around the World with Dane Waters. I'm your host, Dane Waters. We are very honored, as always, to have the great Paul Jacob with us, coming to us from the United States. Paul, how are you?
I'm doing very well, and it's always fun to talk to you, Dane. And this particular conversation isn't in the middle of the night, U.S. time, so I'm glad for that.
Well, I appreciate you always taking the time. So, our conversation today is about Trump and his trip to Asia. So, give me your first initial impressions about how it went, and then we'll go from there.
Well, I think there were good parts. I think the way it was dealt with in the U.S. media, which of course is partly absolutely pro-Trump and partly absolutely against Trump, no matter what's happening. But I think most people who watched it would say, "Hey, this was a pretty successful trip." Uh, to me, the successful part, the most important positive part, was connecting with the prime minister, new prime minister in Japan, who I'm very excited about. I think is great, very pro Taiwan, very very concerned about China, looking to build up Japan's defenses and so on. So I think that's a critical relationship, and I'm glad that it looks like it got off to a good start. I think the other part was the deal with China, and I think that that has largely been portrayed as, Trump said it was a 12 out of 10. Others have viewed it maybe a little skeptically, but positive. Um, I think it's not positive in this way. If we go negotiate with China and the negotiators, the person in the White House who's going to make the deal does not realize that China makes deals that it doesn't keep, that China can't be trusted, that China is led by the CCP, which is a genocidal totalitarian bunch, well, then it's hard to get any deal that's going to be good. For instance, there's a deal on fentanyl. Well, this isn't the first deal on fentanyl. It's like the third or fourth, and every single one of them has added up to nothing. A lot of promises on the front end, and absolutely nothing but more fentanyl coming into the country on the back end. So I have to say that as much as I think the average American watching news coverage would say, "Hey, this was a pretty successful trip," and it looks like, where the trade tensions with China are lessening and so on. I look at it and well, I'll mention one thing that struck me. It was said that Taiwan didn't come up. And I was a little surprised after hearing that how happy I was that Taiwan hadn't come up, because there's this underlying concern that as much as Trump in his first term, was loved in Taiwan and pretty much ended our completely crazy relationship where, we were helping China do whatever China wanted to do at our own expense. Um, After all of that, my fear is that President Trump could decide that he got some great deal on soybeans to China and maybe forget how critically important to the future of the free world Taiwan is. So that's my take on the trip was partly good, but we have the same problems that we've had for some time, which is we don't fully recognize China is at war with us. And it's a gray war oftentimes. But if you're negotiating with someone who wants to end your existence and you don't recognize that, it's always scary to negotiate. So good on Japan, still absolutely frightening on China.
Well, there's two things about China too you have to talk about. One is yes, I'll come back to the Taiwan part because it's very important. But Trump keeps talking about how he wants to end the war in Russia, and the number one reason that Russia is able to continue this war is because of China, and Russia didn't even come up in the conversation.
Right.
So you look at the fact that Russia didn't come up, which if he truly wants to end the war in Ukraine, he would convince Russia to stop their support, but that didn't come up. And as far as Taiwan is concerned, you made this statement about how, he will recognize the importance of Taiwan to freedom around the world. Do you really believe that Donald Trump cares about freedom?
Well, I'm not sure what how that works in the metric, because I think he is just a completely believing in the great man, theory of history, that everything happens because some great man makes it happen, and that ideas like freedom don't drive things. Whereas I think the opposite. I think big ideas drive men. And I don't think he's anti-freedom for Taiwan. What I think is he doesn't fully appreciate that Taiwan is just not another country somewhere that if it went under and was taken over by China would have a little effect. It would have a gigantic effect. And when you think about it, it is the fact that it produces 90% plus of the high-end computer chips in the world. I mean, that alone would alter the future of the world economy and would put us into a recession, if not depression. And then, of course, there's the strategic military importance of Taiwan, right there in the first island chain, in between the Philippines and Japan. And if it's lost, defending the Philippines or defending Japan all of a sudden becomes a lot tougher. And there's all these things that don't get discussed in American political dialogues. And so it's not shocking that maybe Trump doesn't know it. Most Americans, I don't think, have any real idea. They know that Taiwan is a free country and they like Taiwan for that reason, but they don't, I think, fully appreciate how important it is. And so until we, it strikes me that we can hope and pray that Donald Trump, or let's hope Taiwan is still hasn't been invaded by China when he leaves office, the next guy recognizes the importance of it. But it's really incumbent on you and I and others who care to not just sit around hoping and praying that our leaders will understand. The more we can get the American people to wake up to what's happening around the world. And of course, Americans have kind of turned internal more. America first, we do too much, we spend too much around the world. And that may be true in different ways, but we have to get the public engaged in this issue and thinking about Taiwan, because I'm convinced the moment that people understand the importance of Taiwan, and especially not just the military strategic and the economic importance, but also the fact that this is a country that went from basically a right-wing totalitarian government to the freest country in Asia in the last 30 years. And it's if you want freedom in the world, and not just we Americans want freedom, all over the world people want freedom. If you do, you can't allow an example like Taiwan to be snuffed out by a totalitarian country that is becoming more and more militarily powerful. And if anyone thinks, gee, well, why risk it all over Taiwan? It's just one place. Not only is it important in all the ways I've mentioned, but they're not going to stop there. I mean, they've been ramming ships, Philippine ships in the South China Sea. They've done all kinds of things with Vietnam. They've got border clashes with India. China is a threat to all of their neighbors. And as they get bigger and stronger, they're a threat to everybody else. And so if we don't recognize that, we will be dependent on our leaders doing the right thing in something of a political vacuum. And I think it's up to us as American citizens to say, hey, we recognize this, and start putting pressure on Mr. Trump and on folks in Congress. And folks in Congress on both sides of the aisle pretty much get it. They have really gotten it over the last 4, 5, 6 years. It's, I think, at Trump's level where you're just always afraid that he gets excited about some deal he can cut with China, which is a big economy, and forgets that freedom is more important than a couple more shekels.
Well, I agree, but let me take this. I mean, I agree that Congress has done more, but once again, America does not recognize Taiwan as an independent country. Does not, so I still believe there's a lot of room for Congress and our administration to do more, and I think the first step would be to recognize them. Now, I understand, I'm going to go back to Russia as well, because once again, as far as Russia is concerned, China supports Russia, which is why they're continuing to win the war. And I say win the war because they are winning the war. I can understand, I don't agree with it, but I can understand, hey, we don't want to necessarily pick a fight with Russia because they have nuclear weapons, okay? And so I understand that to some degree. But when it comes to Taiwan, I mean, they are being considered a pawn. I mean, as we know, we have to recognize that Trump did delay. I don't know if he's changed it. He did delay giving
Yep.
military aid to Taiwan while he's negotiating with China. A clear indication to China. If I were China, I'd say, oh, well, clearly he's not going to protect them if he's willing to stop their military aid while we negotiate a trade. Number one. Number two is he's already agreed to go back to Beijing for the second meeting. He just met Xi in China, in Asia, in Korea,
Right.
on the sidelines of a meeting, and now he's agreeing to go back to them. And I equate this as like, I play poker every now and then online. It's the reality is if you have a stack of chips, you like to push people around. Okay, the person at the table with the most chips can push people around, and that's exactly what China is doing. They're pushing people around because they control the economy, they're militarily strong and getting stronger, so they're able to push people around, and people need to push back. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's use this. Let's take this opportunity. By the way, I have to throw this before we continue about Taiwan. I did find it funny, and funny is probably not the right word, the fact that he started his trip by being there and signing the peace deal between Cambodia and Thailand, as if somehow it was magical that he brought peace to that conflict. And anyway, I don't know. That's one of
He's
his.
he has solved many wars, some we didn't even know about.
I know
But
it. Anyway, I found it
I
humorous.
do think you raised an issue that is the underbelly of this whole issue. Everyone in the free world, and I'm talking about England and Germany and Czechoslovakia or the Czech Republic and France and other countries, they look at Taiwan and our own country, look at Taiwan and say, "Oh, it's a great place. It's a free country. We're behind it." But then officially, we're not behind it. We don't even recognize it as a country. And why? Because we want to make money. We recognize here's a good country, free, recognizes human rights. Here's a country where they kill people and sell their organs. And as China is just horrible. But to make a couple extra bucks, we're going to kowtow to China, pun intended, or allusion intended, and let them have all kinds of advantages because we'll make a few extra bucks. And so we as citizens, anybody who looks at this situation thinks, how on earth do you not recognize this country? Why would you not do that? And we're going to have to put the pressure on them because right now, the reason we don't recognize them is because our political leaders and our big, big economic interests want to make money in China and don't really care about future of the world with the same oomph. And
Yeah.
and unless the public is engaged, and see, the public I think doesn't even really, it's not on their radar screen that we've never really, not never, but that we don't recognize Taiwan. So that's a way to start the discussion, because the more people look at the country of Taiwan and understand the country of China led by the CCP, the more they will come to the right conclusion, because one is the freest country in Asia, as I've mentioned, and the other is a genocidal totalitarian regime. It's not tough for the American people if it gets on their radar screen to make the right decision there and then put pressure on folks like Trump. I know that a few years ago when really U.S. China relationships hit the rocks. You had I talked to a pollster and he said the one position that is political suicide is for anyone to look like they're pro-China. And that's, for years we had, we were told all kinds of good things about China, and you had a high percentage of Americans, not a majority, but a sizable minority who, oh, they're our friends and they're a good country. Now people realize that's not the case. We've got to put that pressure on our elected officials, and if that's out there, they will do the right thing. Otherwise, it's you can flip a coin.
Well, let's talk about this real quick because we have 5 minutes left. So I'm going to go through, you say the American public, which I agree, they don't understand and recognize the importance of Taiwan. Clearly, President Trump does not recognize the importance of Taiwan. So let's just kind of go through this. And once again, I wish we had more time to talk about Asia, which we will. Number one, there are two camps, and tell me if you agree with this. There are two camps of thought about why Taiwan's important. One is from the freedom democracy standpoint, that we, America, should, which we are failing at, should be the bastion of, I don't say the policeman, but we should protect freedom and democracy around the world and to ensure that authoritarian regimes like China don't take over. That's number one. That's bucket A. Bucket B, and I think there are people in America who believe that, but I think they're more the old school people than anything else. But and B, let's sadly talk about if you're an American and you don't care about freedom, you don't care about democracy, let's talk specifically about why you should care about Taiwan. Number one, you said it's an economic concern because of the chips, right? Walk us through that. Right. We're going to do this 1, 2, 3. We got 5 minutes to get through these things. Okay.
All right. In terms of the chips, this drives the military. It drives, you can't build a car without the chips. You can't build a refrigerator. You can't build the chip near monopoly by Taiwan is a huge factor in the world. And if tomorrow China invaded, there's some debate about whether they could actually grab the chip manufacturing and all the technology and so on and somehow take that over. There's a lot of folks who believe they couldn't, but whether they can or not, the entire world is all of a sudden without the key component to building airplanes for military use and missiles and cars and TVs and all kinds of things. This is very serious stuff. And I believe it was in the Biden administration where the Treasury Secretary said if China attacked Taiwan, the loss of those chips would create a worldwide depression. So it's very, very serious stuff.
Right. And so just to build on that, so the counter that the Trump people would say is that, oh, well, we've convinced NVIDIA to build, or TMC to build a new plant in Arizona. Okay, let's just take that for a second. That's 5 to 10 years in the future, people. Okay, so if China were to attack Taiwan over the next 6 months, which I think is very theoretically possible, there may be a backstop, but you can't just build a chip factory tomorrow. That's going to be years in the future. Yes. And in the interim, we will not have access to those chips. That's number one. Number two, let's talk about navigation. Okay. Number two, why the world should be concerned and Americans could be concerned. Talk to us about the South China Sea.
Well, if you look at a map, you're going to see, and for one, you'll see that Taiwan's very close to 80 miles off the coast of China, but there are actually parts of Japan that are islands that are Japan's that are closer to Taiwan than Taiwan is to China. And if you look at all those islands, and of course the Philippines is a bunch of islands, I think thousands, that's the first island chain. And Taiwan during World War II was referred to as the unsinkable battleship or aircraft carrier or something. But I mean, it's this huge island that is strategically very important. And if it's not there in free hands and it's in China's control, all of a sudden it has tremendous leverage against Japan and against the Philippines. It separates those. Japan can't effectively come to the Philippines' aid. And in the South China Sea, China has grabbed, according to its maps, 90% of the South China Sea. And if you look at a map, a lot of that is hundreds of miles away from China. It has nothing, it's not anywhere close to China. They're literally claiming the coast of the Philippines or the coast of Vietnam and saying this is ours.
Well, let
And
me
there have
interrupt
been
you there,
all
Rick. Let me
kinds of
interrupt you.
incidents.
Let me interrupt you to make sure that people understand. The way international law is that countries are allowed for their territorial their maritime law, I think, is to be no more than 50 miles off their coast, or I believe it is, or something like that, or maybe 25 miles off their coast. Is there
I think it may be 12,
oh,
but
12
then
miles?
there's
Okay,
the
12.
200-mile,
Right.
economic zone and so on. But
So the reality is off China's coast, they're allowed 12 miles to control it and say it's theirs. Now, on the South China Sea issue, if they were to take Taiwan, then if you look at a map as you're talking about, that allows them, even on the other side of Taiwan, to take a greater control of the South China Sea and the navigable seas, which impacts stuff coming from Vietnam, impacts stuff coming from Japan, impacts stuff coming to the Philippines, impacts stuff coming to Singapore, impacts all these nations that we get a lot of stuff from coming to us, number one, but also it stops a lot of stuff going to other countries to be manufactured. So the impact on allowing China to control Taiwan means that they can control more of the navigable seas in the region, which then impacts the economy. So Americans, if you want to know why we need to protect Taiwan, we need it so not only do we need to have access to the chips, we need it so that the boats and the ships literally can get to us, okay, and literally bring us the stuff and literally bring stuff to other countries to make. So wake up, world, and recognize that those are two very distinct reasons economically we need to care about Taiwan, correct?
yes, and in fact, if we will be paying a toll to go through the South China Sea, a third of world commerce travels through the South China Sea, and Asia is 60% of the world population. So if China controls the South China Sea and we can't trade without saluting China and saying, "Hey, do you mind if we go through this ocean that you now have claimed?" Uh, Economically, that hit is gigantic. And as much as people are, I think, starting to get aware of the chips and the importance of Taiwan, it's not just Taiwan. It's because sometimes people will say, "Oh, well, this is an age-old fight between the mainland and Taiwan." They don't understand Taiwanese history, that it hasn't been part of China forever. But but the key thing people need to realize is there are all kinds of attacks on the Philippines, on Vietnam. China is claiming all kinds of things in Asia, including this entire ocean. So it's not just a battle, a confrontation between Taiwan and China. China's confronting everyone. I mean, it's why Japan was more than happy to be hey, we're just totally defensive. We don't have any offensive capability. They can't do that anymore. They realize China will come take their
Yeah,
islands away.
yeah.
And so this is it. It is a level of seriousness. It would be like us, claiming huge parts of the Atlantic or Pacific Ocean, or we've renamed the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, but we're not telling Mexico that it's our water and they
Well,
can't go in
yet
it.
I would say yet
Not
I would say
yet.
yet yeah. So, but listen, I sadly have to interrupt you because we're running out of time here. But let's just sum this up. The reality is for the world to recognize that economically, I mean, if we allow China to take Taiwan, if we allow China to continue what it's doing in the South China Sea, then it's going to have even a greater economic leverage on us in other ways. Tariffs, they'll negotiate down the tariffs, they'll negotiate so many other things. So once again, I'm going to say, wake up, America, realize China is a threat. If we want peace in Russia, punish China. If we want economic superiority, then we need to protect Taiwan, and we need to protect the South China Sea. Paul, it's always great to see you, man. But sadly, we're out of time. I'm like my good Southern accent coming out there.